is meant here regarding this place, Babylon the Great. When considering the Old Testament prophecies and history and the descriptions of this place in Scripture, we learn that this will probably be an actual city that will be the capital of the Antichrist's global political, economic, and religious empire. The name Babylon is a fitting name given its vile and blasphemous history. Let me give you a snapshot now, and we'll look at it in more detail when we come to chapter 17. 1,656 years after God created Adam, he destroyed the entire world. The conservative estimate is that he killed about 7 billion people. It's about how many were on earth by the time of the flood. He killed all except 8 people who found favor in the eyes of the Lord: Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. And we see that Adam sees the world into its 9th generation, and he dies 1 generation before the flood. And we know that he longed for righteousness to reign and Satan to be defeated. But 100 years after the flood, Satan tried to establish an earthly kingdom through Nimrod, who was Noah's great-grandson. We read about this in Genesis chapter 10. And of course, Nimrod is a foreshadow of the Antichrist. And this occurred in the land of Shinar, which today is the region of Iraq, the same region of the Garden of Eden, in the land of Mesopotamia. It was in this Tigris and Euphrates River area that the first battles on earth were fought between the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light. And beloved, the last battles will be fought there as well. We read of the land of Shinar in Genesis 10, that place where Nimrod founded Babel. The Hebrew form of the name is Babylon. And in Genesis 11, we read about the Tower of Babel. It was a ziggurat, or a stage tower, that was erected to facilitate idolatry. And on top of this tower, we know from others that were built like it, was the sign of the zodiac, where the priests would chart the stars and supposedly receive spiritual insight and prophecy. History reveals that Nimrod had a wife named Semiramis. She was a wife and a priestess. Stories are told about how that a sunbeam came through a window and impregnated her, and she conceived and bore a son named Tammuz, a counterfeit of the virgin birth of Christ. In fact, later Israel was rebuked for worshiping this person called the Queen of Heaven. She was the pagan goddess Ishtar. We read about that in Jeremiah 44. And they also worshiped her son Tammuz. We read about in Ezekiel 8:14. And this worship in those days included all manner of the most abominable forms of immorality, things not fitting to even speak of. We can see, by the way, this mother-son fertility cult goddess worship in Roman Catholicism today and many other religions. There are undeniable parallels in Roman Catholicism. They worship Mary, which is called the Queen of Heaven. It should be no surprise, if I can digress for a moment, that the Roman Catholic Church is positioning itself to be at the center of the current move toward globalization in our world today and the emerging world government that so many are talking about, and certainly that the Scriptures predict. In a recent papal treatise entitled Charity and Truth, given by Pope Benedict XVI, just prior to the meeting of the G8 nations in Italy this July, he stated that there is an urgent need for a, quote, true world political authority, end quote, to manage world affairs. The New York Times noted on July 7 that the Pope's controversial statement clearly endorsed a new world economic order. The Pope did warn, however, that such a order would, quote, produce a dangerous universal power of a tyrannical nature. And therefore, end quote, therefore he warned about that. Isn't it interesting how the events of Bible prophecy always cast their shadows forward? As another footnote, Russian President Medvedev shocked the world at that G8 summit in July. Maybe you saw this, by showing reporters a coin that he said represents a future world currency. I've seen pictures of it. It's a beautiful coin, and on it it says, "Unity in diversity." Well, because of Satan's original attempt to establish himself an earthly kingdom at Babel, and because of the exceedingly vile nature of the idolatry that took place during that time, you will recall in Genesis 11 that God confounded the languages of these worshipers and scattered them to the ends of the earth. And so out of the Tower of Babel, the complex of all pagan religions were spawned. And like a virulent virus, they spread these blasphemous idolatries all across the globe. And later, of course, the great empire of Babylon was built there with Nebuchadnezzar. And again, today it's the land of Iraq. And we know that just before the Lord returns, history is going to basically come full circle. And all these false religions, all these false religious systems are going to come home to mama, as it were. In Revelation chapter 17 and verse 5, we read, "Babylon the Great, the mother of all harlots and of the abominations of the earth." All of these false systems will eventually be rolled into the worship of the beast that is personified by the harlot. So the celestial preacher now pronounces judgment on all who worship this world-dominating counterfeit kingdom of Antichrist that God calls Babylon the Great. It's reminiscent of King Nebuchadnezzar in ancient Babylon. You will remember his arrogant statement in Daniel chapter 4 and verse 29, where we read, "He was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. The king reflected and said, 'Is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty?'" Dear friends, even as God defeated that ancient puppet of Satan, Nebuchadnezzar, so too will he defeat Satan's puppet, the Antichrist. And notice the reason God gives for this coming fall of Babylon in verse 8. "She who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality." What he's saying here is that this Babylonian harlot will intoxicate the world with her wine. And this is emblematic of both her sexual licentiousness as well as many other ways that she will manifest blasphemy towards the living God. He speaks of the passion of her immorality. This speaks of the burning desire that this system will have to seduce people to commit spiritual fornication. And sadly, as they drink of her wine, we see that they will eventually, according to verse 10, drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger. And this is the message of the third angel, yet another incentive to fear God and give him glory, not only because of the eternal gospel and the coming fall of Babylon, but thirdly, the torment awaiting beast worshipers. Obviously, they will not heed the first two angels, and so in verse 9 we read, "And another angel, a third one, followed them, saying with a loud voice, 'If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives a mark on his forehead or upon his hand,'" which, as you will recall, is the symbol of loyalty to the beast, "he also will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger." Now, unmixed wine was the strongest wine. And so God uses this imagery to depict the full strength of divine wrath that will be utterly bereft, utterly unmixed with any mercy